Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. I know other people will be filtering in as we go throughout these first few minutes here. But hello and welcome to our 14th annual National Postdoc Appreciation Week, or NPAW. I'm Tom Kembis. I'm Executive Director and CEO of the National Postdoctoral Association. We at the NPA are thrilled to have you join us today for our national kickoff to NPAW. I recently had the opportunity to reflect on what makes work at the NPA so special. And in a word, it's you. It's our postdocs. It's a postdoctoral community who work across all disciplines, from life sciences and engineering to psychology and linguistics. You may be the leaders of tomorrow, but you're clearly also the leaders of today. The NPA founded NPAW to provide greater recognition of the great work that you do as postdocs. And of the hundreds of postdocs I've had the pleasure to meet so far in my position, I'm amazed at how diligent you are, but also how curious, how thoughtful, and charitable. Many of you have chosen to volunteer at the NPA with your precious free time, so thank you for that. We appreciate what you do, and we also appreciate you. This year's NPAW theme is Internationals in America. It continues our core 2023 programming celebrating international postdocs, who now make up nearly 60% of the postdoc population in the US. We saw from our needs assessment survey that we conducted last fall how critical the particular issues are that affect international scholars on your happiness and your satisfaction, both inside and outside of work. But understanding issues affecting international scholars is not just for postdocs from abroad. It's for domestic postdocs, it's for PDO leaders, it's for principal investigators, for deans, and others in the community who need to understand these issues. We work in teams and in communities, and our collective effectiveness is driven by greater understanding. Before we turn to today's speakers, a few important points and reminders. So first, remember that NPAW does last all week. Visit the NPAW Hub on the NPA website to see the full calendar of events, which include local ones and others you can join virtually, which may be housed at another institution. Many of those are open to you, no matter where you're located. You can sign up for any of those using the link that is in the chat. Second, advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, including looking at international scholars in the postdoc community, is one of the NPA's core values. If you missed our announcement last week, our NPA Impact Fellowship Program, now in its third year, that increases access to opportunities for postdocs from underrepresented communities to build skills, to develop networks, and to lead innovative projects was announced. And we're thrilled to welcome the members of the NPA Impact Fellows class of 2023 and 2024. That's Dr. Angela Crumdy from the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Lisa Eshin-Wilson at the Scripps Research Institute, Dr. Pierre Kawak at the University of South Florida, Dr. Nicole Mathis at the University of New Mexico, Dr. Islamia Abidemi Raji at Queen's University in Ontario, and Dr. Henkel Valentine at Fox Chase Cancer Center. So congratulations to all six, as we received nearly 100 highly competitive applications for those spots. Also on the DEI front, I'm proud to announce today that our third annual Equity Summit, which stays on the theme and focuses on issues affecting international scholars, will take place on Thursday, November 9th from 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern. We have an outstanding lineup already of discussion leaders, kicking off with Doug Rand, who's Senior Advisor to the Director at the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, or USCIS. Registration opens today for that free event. See the link in the chat. And like our other equity summits, it's open to the full community, not just NPA members. So please spread the word. These summits are designed to provide platforms to discuss difficult topics and to take those discussions back to your home institutions. We're also seeking partners and sponsors for these critical partners, Impact and our Equity Summit, whether individuals, associations, institutions, or companies. Anyone can make a difference. So see the link in the chat for more information on how you can do so. Next, during NPAW for the last 3 years, we've conducted the annual NPA postdoc needs assessment, It's a really important task. We need the feedback from you and from postdoc office leaders. This information helps us understand how the postdoc population is shifting and allows us to be more effective on your behalf. It's also seen by leaders in universities, in industry, in heads of government agencies, as well as federal funders. Completing the survey takes less than 10 minutes, makes you eligible to win an Amazon gift card. The link is in the chat, like many of the other things I mentioned today, but please complete it after today's session to give today's speakers your full attention. And also remember to share it with your peers and throughout your workplace, postdoc associations, and networks as well. Lastly, thank you to our NPAW sponsors, Gallagher Insurance and the Rise Up Includes Alliance, both of whom are repeat NPAW supporters. You can learn more about them by visiting the links you see in the chat as well. And now I'm excited to introduce today's speakers. We're honored to have with us from the U.S. Department of State, Julie Stufft, who's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Visa Services in the Bureau of Consular Affairs. She's a career member of the Senior Foreign Service and has served as Deputy Chief of Mission in the U.S. Embassies in Moldova and Djibouti, as well as in the National Security Council, Russia, Ethiopia, Poland, and the State Department Operations Center. We're also very fortunate to have Rebecca Wall with us, also from the Bureau of Consular Affairs, where she manages the student and exchange visa portfolio with 15 years of service with the State Department, including appointments around the globe. Joining us as moderator today is Dr. Paula Cepeda, Director of the Office of Postdoc Affairs at the Washington University in St. Louis, and an NPA International Officer. As I turn to Stufft, please feel free to use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen, to ask questions that will then be addressed after our presentations. Dr. Cepeda, as moderator, will review those questions we receive and address them verbally to our presenters. Please try to focus your questions on issues that are important for our whole community to understand, not just ones about your individual visa circumstances. This is being recorded, so it will be for use both later this week in those who were unable to attend live throughout the week in NPAW, as well as in perpetuity on the NPA website. So, Secretary Stufft, the floor is yours with Rebecca to follow.
Tom, thank you so much. And hello, everybody. Good afternoon from Washington. It's really, really a pleasure to be asked to participate today in this. And first, I want to say congratulations on the 14th Annual National Postdoc Appreciation Week. It's such a fitting thing to have a focus on international postdocs here and the work that is done in America by researchers and innovators and professors and all of those who hold visas to be here, particularly from the absolutely outstanding cutting-edge institutions that I know are represented on this call. We at the State Department, I think, and Rebecca and I are both career foreign service officers, as Tom said. We know particularly well, I think maybe better than others, how this type of work, the work that's done by postdocs in the United States, really is the lifeblood of this country. It is the reason that we're able to innovate. It means so much. And to see any research projects that fail because of any bureaucratic process is certainly something that we have made an absolute effort here at State to avoid happening on the visa front. Coming out of the pandemic, as so many of you can identify with, really we wanted to look at our own processes globally and think that how we cannot just go back to the way things were in 2018 and 19 and before that, but to make things noticeably better for our clients, to noticeably better for the institutions who are inviting scholars and researchers to come to the United States on a J visa or an F or an H-1B. How can we work within the law, U.S. law, to make sure that there's a consistent and an innovative experience for everyone in these categories at any of our embassies and consular sections overseas? I can tell you that this is absolutely where my bosses and I are looking every single day to make that process better. And we have made some progress, which I'll share with you in the last couple of years as we've made an effort to really just absolutely change our processes out of the pandemic. But I also want to just foot stomp something that Tom said. It really is important for us to have your feedback. That's one big reason that we come to events like this. We want to hear what you're experiencing. We want to hear the trend lines that you're seeing, and we make a point of meeting a lot with universities in particular to see if there's some things that we're missing from here in Washington. So please don't hold back in the chat. And if we're not able to get to it with Dr. Cepeda through this session, we will certainly follow up on those. I have the pleasure of telling you that, when it comes to issuing visas for qualified researchers to come to the United States, we now have two different fronts. We have our foreign offices, our 230 U.S. embassies and consulates overseas, where we have traditionally issued visas, and we have a new domestic program that we will be using to issue these visas, and that's very exciting. Before I get to that, let me tell you, as we start to close our fiscal year, which will end at the end of this month, I'm really pleased to say that we've issued a historic number of visas this year, not only to everyone in all visa categories, but certainly to researchers, students, postdocs, professors, anyone coming on an H, J, or F visa. We're seeing record numbers, higher than probably in the last decade. We haven't quite gotten to the end of the year yet, so we'll see. But we're very excited that that's happening. I mean, that shows that we're that these relationships are back and continuing and maybe even growing, and that the research, important research, continues in the United States that everyone's working on. In particular, we've issued 44% more H-1B visas for researchers this year than in 2019, which we generally use as our baseline year to compare pre-pandemic numbers to. And a lot of that's been possible. Well, there are a number of reasons. One is that we've expanded interview waiver authorities so that a lot of folks who would have needed an interview to come in to an embassy or consulate don't need that. The visa can be issued without having them present. That's been a huge help to us. We've issued about half of our total visas this year, or I guess last year, but also probably this year, in the category of interview waived visas. So helpful for us because we can do more. We don't reduce national security at all in those processes, but we're able to get people to their work more effectively. And I did mention, Tom, the domestic revalidation, which I'm guessing that a few people on the call have already heard about. We're piloting that this year. We'll start issuing those visas at the beginning of 2024. And some might remember that we did this about 20 years ago, where you could, if you were living and working in the United States, and certainly a lot of folks in the postdoc community would fall into this category, you could send your visa for renewal to Washington, and we would do that and send it back to you without requiring folks to go back overseas and hopefully get a spot in line to wait for a visa interview and not get stuck there. It is that stuck situation that we're trying to avoid by doing this. And by piloting that again this year for the first time in 2 decades, we will be able to give that peace of mind as we expand that program to folks who are living and working in the United States on a visa, being able to maintain that status and travel freely without having to go overseas to an interview. It also helps our sections overseas that are very busy to not have those cases, those very clearly approvable, in most cases, visa applicants, and we can handle those here in Washington. So we're very, very excited about that development. And we will roll out the expansion of that. Right now we're piloting it, so it's a very limited number, but we look forward to expanding that in 24 and beyond. I want to just hat tip my colleague here, Rebecca Wall. She is a really, really amazing expert. She's talked to so many different research institutions and universities in her time here in the visa office. And I think we're going to have time to do questions after Dr. Cepeda, but I want to give the floor to Rebecca so she has a chance to give her updates as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Stufft. Give me 1 second to get my PowerPoint up. Great. So as Stufft said, we are really excited to be here today. Really appreciate all of the great work that all the scholars on this call have done. Appreciate being invited to participate. I want to speak a little bit today about the work that the Department of State's doing. But before I do that, I actually have been asked to speak a little bit about the difference between the work that the Department of State does and the work that our colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security does. I think sometimes when you're in this all the time, you really have a good idea of what that division of labor looks like. But for folks that aren't living and breathing it every day, it's helpful just to hear where we sort of work in this field and then where DHS colleagues sort of take over on the other side. A really easy way to think about this is that the Department of State is primarily supporting you internationally overseas. When you're applying for your visa, when you're getting your DS 2019, perhaps if you go back home to apply for an H-1B visa, the Department of State can also support you with the visa waiver process if you have the 212E requirement that you have to overcome. But generally, the support that we are providing is overseas. Now, that's a little bit different with our colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security. So their responsibility really takes hold as soon as you come to that immigration office at the border. So when you're engaging with our colleagues at Customs and Border Protection, they actually do have the final jurisdiction over whether or not you're allowed to enter the country. So we like to say that a visa gets you on the airplane and it gets you to the border, but then our DHS colleagues really do have that final say of who can be admitted. You're also going to engage more with DHS when you're looking to change status. So if you're here domestically on a J1 and you don't need to overcome the 212E requirement and you're looking to switch to an H-1B to change your status, that's something you're going to do with the Department of Homeland Security. If you're looking to change your school, update your CVIS record, get support from your any of the DSOs that are liaising with the Department of Homeland Security, that's really all DHS's lane. I say that now because I'm already anticipating lots of questions about changing status in the United States. And so unfortunately, we likely won't be able to get into that into too much detail. Having said that, I do want to focus a little bit on the Department of State's commitment to international scholars. And Stufft did touch upon this. She went over some of the numbers of the amount of folks that we've been issuing post-pandemic. Over 284,000 J1 visas and adjudicated and issued in fiscal year 2022, 48,000 of which were for research scholars and professors. And then even in addition to the J1s, to the H-1B visas, which we've adjudicated 44% more of worldwide post-pandemic. So it really is a new world when it comes to visa adjudication, the innovation, the changes, the flexibilities we've been afforded, and that we've really thought long and hard about after the pandemic, how we could pivot to a different way of doing business. And as Stufft touched upon already, one of the ways we've been able to do that is with the interview waiver authorities that both the J1 and H-1B applicants are eligible for, but then also just the prioritization of these appointments. So if you're a scholar and your appointment is starting, we have allowed for expedited appointments at our embassies and consulates overseas. And then in addition, that interview waiver authority, as Stufft mentioned, nearly half of the 7 million non-immigrant visas that we issued in fiscal year 22 were done without an in-person interview. And this really does allow us to save our time for the folks that do need that in-person interview. Just to touch upon this a little more fully of what exactly the interview waiver authorities do mean, for scholars or H-1B applicants who previously had a visa in any visa class or who are citizens or nationals of a visa waiver program country, you may not need to come in for an interview when you're reapplying for your visa or when you're applying for your first time scholar or H-1B application. There's actually a separate authority that you can fall into if you aren't in that certain circumstance, where if you're applying as a scholar at H-1B and you're just renewing your visa within 48 months, that's also a different type of waiver authority. But long story short, what it means is that you may not actually need to come into the embassy, which saves you time, it saves us time, and ensures that we're able to just interview the folks that need that interview. I wanted to touch a little bit on the J1 visa interview. This process is actually quite similar to the H-1B visa interview process itself, although the H-1B does have some more steps that need to take place prior to the interview, which is why I've separated them out here. We really do like to say that visa adjudications themselves, the experience that you have when you go in and you're talking to a consular officer at the window, it really should be the same everywhere around the world. But the process that you use to make that appointment, how you get an expedite appointment, what the wait times might be, those do differ from embassy to embassy and consulate to consulate. So we strongly recommend that you check travel.state.gov to see what the specific requirements are in the location where you're applying. But regardless of those specific requirements, every applicant will fill out their DS-160. You'll pay the visa fee, the MRV fee. You'll pay your SEVIS fee if you're applying for a J1 visa, and then you'll schedule your interview appointment. As I noted, there are expedite appointments available. Embassies and consulates should have their expedite criteria listed on their website. And if you are eligible, you can request that expedite appointment. I should note that in order to make that expedite appointment, you do need to schedule an appointment. So you may see that the next available appointment is several months out, but that your appointment might start earlier on. But what you can then do is make that appointment and request that expedite from the embassy or consulate. I like to highlight these documents because they're the ones that are the only ones that are actually required for the interview: the passport, the photo, your DS-160 confirmation page, either your I-20 or your DS-2018, and your SEVIS fee. Often you will be asked for additional financial documents depending on the embassy or consulate so that you can show that you do have the resources, although in many of your cases you are fully funded, so you don't actually even need to show that. But these are the documents you will be required to bring to the interview. In general, most scholars who interview are issued visas. I'll say that again. Most scholars who interview are issued visas. I know folks can get a little overwhelmed with the process, but in general, as Stufft said, we don't want to be the administrative hurdle that is stopping legitimate scholars from coming to the United States. If you are refused for a visa, you are often refused under two different refusal classes. The first is 214B and the second is 221G. Now, 214B is a final adjudication. It is a final approval and it cannot be overcome. And generally what that means is that the consular officer did not believe that the applicant was intending to depart the United States at the end of their studies, what we refer to as immigrant intent. Now, I will touch upon this on a further slide. This doesn't mean that you cannot tell the officer that you would like to change status to an H-1B at some point in time, and that is your plan. Changing status legally to an H-1B is not grounds for visa refusal as a student or a scholar, but in general, the intention of the interviewing applicant needs to be to depart the United States at the end of their studies. 221G refusal is slightly different. I like to think of this as you forgot something or you need to do something else refusal. You should get a piece of paper detailing what exactly it is you need to do. You might need to bring a marriage certificate for your spouse. You may need to update your SEVIS record so that is a realizable start date. And the consular officer should detail what it is you need to do. The exception to that is 221G refusal for administrative processing. In this circumstance, there isn't much you can do in order to overcome that refusal. The processing will take place. We will let you know when it's completed. You are welcome to check online at travel.state.gov to see the status of that processing. But the consular officer will let you know when that adjudication is complete. There is no documentation that can help you with administrative processing. I get asked this a lot from the academic institutions. Can we provide a paper? Will that help? The same with the expedite appointment request. Can I provide a letter? Will that help my scholar? And the answer is not. Really, the process is set up so that there isn't that influence in the system, and we want to make sure that all applicants have the same access. Again, I mentioned this before, but expressing an interest to pursue an H-1B during a J1 interview is not grounds for refusal. If you do have a situation where you feel like this happened, please make sure to let Tom know and he can let me know. And just in general, I do like to say during these interviews that every scholar, every student, every exchange visitor should have the expectation of being treated with respect during a visa interview. This is something that's really important to us at the Department of State. We recognize that we on the front lines talking with folks overseas who maybe have never spoken with an American before, it's integral, it's critically important that we are doing this in a respectful way. So if there's ever a circumstance where you feel like that's not the case, we do want to know so we can make sure that that's not happening. I want to touch a little bit on the 212 e-physical presence requirement. I know that a lot of you, this is something that you will need to manage if you're deciding to stay here to try to change your status to an H-1B, or if you want to come here as an LPR or a K or an L applicant at some point in the future. This is something that is going to be dependent on the way that your program has been funded, the skills list, and whether or not you're doing graduate medical training. Now, there are waivers that are eligible, but these are granted in limited circumstances, which are listed on the slide here. So these are the different types of categories under which you can request that 212E waiver. You will go through the process of applying through the Department of State at travel.state.gov. And then after the Department of State reviews your application, it will be forwarded on to the Department of Homeland Security to make the final decision on that waiver. One other thing I did want to mention before switching over to talk a little bit about H-1Bs and J-1 STEM opportunity is the electronic DS 2019s. I know it seems a little silly for us to be very excited about a piece of paper going electronic, but I will say we are very excited about this electronic change. We hope that sponsors are excited about it and you are excited about it. It means that now you no longer have to get a snail mailed copy of your DS 2019 in the mail, but you do need to still bring a printed copy to the interview. And currently you still need to carry that copy to the port of entry when you come to the United States. I did just want to touch really briefly on this early career STEM research initiative. This is something our colleagues in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs is really supporting and advocating for right now. And this is the opportunity for some J-1 research scholars to pursue their research off campus with a STEM business. Because of some of those bars that exist for research scholars and professors, the object of the exchange will have to remain the same. For example, you'll have to be researching in the particular subject that you've already been doing research on. But if you are interested in learning more about this initiative, you can visit the website here. You can Google Early Career STEM Research Initiative, or you can email jvisas@state.gov with additional questions. So quickly, I'll touch a bit upon H-1Bs because I know that some folks might be interested in pursuing that option. This requires a higher education degree, and it's a temporary worker visa in employment that lasts a fixed amount of time. So this process is slightly different than when you applied for the J-1 visa because it does require you to first file a petition with the USCIS within the Department of Homeland Security. So once you have an employer who is interested in sponsoring you, they need to submit a labor condition application, an LCA, to the Department of Labor. After that, the employer will submit the LCA with the I-129 petition to USCIS. And then once this petition is approved, you can apply for that H-1B outside of the United States. So this is that point where I know many of you are thinking, how can I apply for that H-1B inside the United States? In which case, I would strongly recommend that you go to the Department of Homeland Security's website and see there, because we're really speaking today about folks that are going to depart the United States and apply for an H-1B overseas. Just a little bit of the numbers for the H-1Bs. There is a cap, that's 65,000 new visas each fiscal year. But there is that 20,000 petitions that are additional for beneficiaries with master's degrees or higher from a U.S. institution of higher education, which I'm sure many of you would fall under. There is the exemption from the cap as well, that folks that are employed at certain institutions, certain entities, or government research organizations. Stufft touched upon this briefly, our H-1B domestic revalidation pilot, which we're really excited about. Right now, though, what this means is it's only for folks who currently have an H-1B visa and are applying to renew that visa. But if you are in that category, there will be a forthcoming Federal Register notice, and it will have instructions on how you can participate in this pilot program. We do expect to extend this pilot program. Right now, we're only authorized to do that for certain visa classes, which is PHILENO. If I had $1 for every time someone asked me if we would be doing domestic revalidation of students or J visas and scholars, I could retire rich now from the government. It's definitely something that we want to continue to look into, but as the way that the authorities are currently written, these are only the visa classes that we can do this for. If you would like to know more about visa policy at the end of this presentation. If you'd like to know more about visa policy as it continues to evolve and change, you can check online or follow us on social media at TravelGov is the handle there. So before I open it up to questions, I really like to just close the presentation again by emphasizing the Department of State's commitment to scholars. You can look at the numbers of visas we've issued. You can look at the prioritization of visa appointments. This is the case for H-1Bs as well. We understand, as Stufft said, how critically important your research, your work, your appointments are to our economy, to our scientific research, really to the growth of our country. And we're really excited to be here today. We want to make sure that folks understand visa policy so that legitimate scholars can come to the United States and do the work that you can do. So with that, I will stop sharing and we'll open up the floor to questions.
Thank you so much for the presentations. We have some questions here related to different topics that you have mentioned during both presentations. So the first one is about single entry J1 visas. How can someone change that type of visa to multiple entry? And if that is possible, what the procedure will be?
So our visa validities and our entries are often based upon reciprocity, which means they're based upon the amount of entries and the time length that other countries allow for Americans to travel to that country. So that's not necessarily something that can be changed. In order to change that, we would have to change our agreement with the host government, the country where the individual is from, in order to change the number of entries or the length of time of the visa.
Thank you. Another question is asking about the domestic pilot program that both of you mentioned before. And as you informed us, this is available as a pilot for H-1Bs. People are asking if there is a possibility that it will be open for F1s and J1s, and if there is any idea about a timeline in which this can be happening.
I'm collecting my additional $1 and I'm adding it to the pile. Unfortunately, as I said, the way that the current regulations are written, we are only authorized to look into the P, H, I, L, E, and O categories for this program. But we are going to look at how they go. We're going to see how this works. And at that point, we may be able to continue trying to change the way the authorities are granted to us, which will be a longer process than what we are currently allowed, to see if we can expand it to other visa classes. Believe me, we have heard the message loud and clear that this is top of folks' agenda, both for scholars, students, and folks in the educational stakeholder communities.
Related to the same topic, the pilot for H-1B and the possibility of changing the visa, in the United States. So this is a two-part question. The first one is, when does it begin? And second, it was mentioned that it was a limited number of visas. Is there a pre-selection for that?
That stuff, do you know the exact timeline of when the pilot will exactly begin? That stuff has just messaged me to say she is blocked from unmuting, unfortunately. I understand it is supposed to be happening this fall, so imminently it should be coming online. So if you want to check travel.stat.gov, you can see when we do release that. It will be on our social media sites and on the websites. And I can also make sure that Tom knows this as well when we do release this.
Yeah, I'll just add, thank you for unmuting me, the powers that be. It's yes, this is likely going to be in November that we'll put out the first Federal Register notice to the public about the terms of the pilot program. And then as we collect those, we'll move into 2024 with those applications and make sure that it works first. Just to say something more on what Rebecca said, there's obviously just tremendous interest in extending this domestic revalidation concept to Fs and Js. And we would support that totally. From the State Department side, I know that other agencies would support it, and that just requires us to rewrite to
I'm
request
sorry,
that the
something
regulations be rewritten to allow that. So that's not a quick process, but it's certainly something that we can make an effort to do as the pilot itself becomes a working program. Thank you.
I want to
Hello,
apologize because
I
I
have a
was
question.
meeting. Just a moment, so I will find the question. Okay, thank you for that answer. Another question that came up was about the Early Career STEM Research Initiative. People are excited that J1 scholars can continue the research in a business. And they were wondering if this would be considered a work. So if you mentioned that it has to be the same type of research, but sometimes, projects expand. So could you please clarify on exactly what the same type of research means?
So this would still be a J1 visa. You would be doing this work on a J1 visa with a sponsor in the same way that you are doing your current work as a J1. What it would mean is that your sponsor wouldn't be an academic institution. It would be a business who works in the STEM field. And my understanding is that this is generally for folks who are already doing research in an academic field and still have time left or have the ability to extend their J1 research, or I think it's primarily research scholar exchange, and continue to work with that business. But I will preface this by saying this is by no means my area of expertise, and the best folks to reach out to would be our ACA colleagues at that JVisa email address, or to check out their website.
Thank you. Another question that we have here is about J1 extension. This person would like to know about the requirements. And since most contracts for postdocs are 1-year contracts, how does this or how does this impact, the DS-19 in this case?
So I'm not sure what exactly you mean by J1 extension. I do know that J1s can request a change of status when they're in the United States from the Department of Homeland Security. I will stop speaking there because that's about as far as I know about what happens after that process. But if you are a J1, you can request to change your status. And I believe you can even request to extend or change into a new J1 when you're in the United States. However, if you're looking to get a new visa because your visa is expired and you're not going the route of changing status with the Department of Homeland Security, then you will need to depart the United States for another J visa interview. You are able to do another J visa program without fulfilling that 212E requirement. A J visa is not one of the visas that you are prohibited from coming under if you are subject to 212E. But if you do want to get a new visa with new validity, with new entries, with new expiration, you will need to depart the United States to apply for that J1 visa again.
And these are great questions too for Doug Rand. I think, Tom, that you said that he would be joining you and he knows this stuff cold.
Thank you. There are several questions about time, and people are asking about waiting times for a different type of paperwork that they have to do regarding J1, regarding the waiver of the 2-year home residency requirement. Do you have any information about why the waiting times are so long, and if there is anything that the Department of State can do in order to reduce those waiting times?
Our understanding from our colleagues who review the waiver request right now is that for a no objection waiver, the wait time is currently about 3 to 6 months for the waiver to be reviewed by the Department of State. And then after that, it will be reviewed by the Department of Homeland Security. If you do have a situation where you'd like to request an expedite for your waiver review, you have a humanitarian emergency, a medical emergency, or a reason why an expedite would be needed, there is a process online for requesting that expedite request, and you can do that at the website at travel.state.gov.
going over the questions to find some of them that are generalized, general for everyone. This is a follow-up on the visa pilot questions. Could the waiver be applied to new applicants of visas? So if that can become also a pilot, I think, as far as I understand, those applicants that are already in the US, will they have priority for getting the waiver instead of going back to their countries first?
I think the questioner is asking that if you are applying for an H-1B domestically, whether you would be expedited in your 212E waiver review. I think right now that's not part of the expedite criteria, because in order to apply domestically for the revalidation domestically, you need to have had an H-1B previously. So if you previously had an H-1B, you've already had a 212E waiver, because you can't come here on an H-1B if you previously had a J. So I think that individual would still need to be leaving the United States to fulfill their 212E requirement unless they got that waiver.
Thank you. This is a question about J1. If J1 visa is issued with the 212G administrative processing once, will it also go again upon a renewal of visa, or is it just a one-time process?
I recommend that all students apply as far in advance, all scholars apply in far in advance as possible when they're applying for a visa. If someone was subject to administrative processing in the past, it could be the case that they will be subject to administrative processing again in the future. It's not a guarantee. We have recently updated the way that we do administrative processing, which has led to more streamlined processing and has decreased the amount of applicants who need to go through administrative processing. So if it was the case that you had administrative processing 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and you're applying again, you may not need it. If you had administrative processing 6 months ago, you may likely have that same administrative processing again, because our processes have changed about a year ago at this point. But in general, there are less folks that are subject to administrative processing. And that's something else that's really helped us to speed up the number of applicants that we're issuing and to reduce our wait times.
Will you please elaborate a little bit more about the J1 interview and the new proposal for expressing interest in H-1B after J1, that now is not a reason for refusal?
I would say for individuals going to their interview, the purpose of the interview is to determine what they want to do with their J visa. Why are they studying in a particular field of study? Why are they doing a particular field of research? And what they hope to do after that. Adjudicators want to hear that you have a plan. If you know now that your plan is to apply for an H-1 visa, it doesn't hurt to talk about that. Having said that, I will also say that plans change. If you're going to do a 7-year postdoc and you're not sure what you'll do at the end of it, you don't necessarily have to pontificate about what you might do hypothetically in the future, 14 years on. But again, if you are sure that you want to apply for that H-1B and that's part of your career trajectory, it is okay to say that to the adjudicator. It is okay to say that I want to continue to work as an H-1B at the end of my visa processing. If you do have a situation where you feel like you were refused because of that statement, we do want to know. This is guidance we continue to reiterate for adjudicators in the field. But if there are circumstances where you're feeling like that was not the situation, please do let us know.
If I don't get my J1 waiver and have to go back to my country, will I have priority when I apply for a J1 again?
Now I understand that question. So the priority will be dependent on the individual expedite criteria on that embassy or consulate website. Generally, most expedite criteria for embassies or consulates is, when does your appointment start? Do you have a medical emergency? Do you have a humanitarian emergency? For most scholars and students and exchange visitors, we really do try to make sure that folks can get to their research, to their studies, to their program on time, as indicated on the DS 2019. So you would have priority insofar as we prioritize all exchange visitors who have an appointment that is coming up soon, insofar as we can, based upon the other demands and wait times in that particular embassy or consulate. I know that there are some embassies or consulates where that is not always possible. If you know that the wait times are particularly long in a place where you applied, please apply in advance. Also, you do not need to go to your home country to apply again. You can apply for a visa wherever you are able to get an appointment. Having said that, you can only be eligible for interview waiver authorities in the country of which you're a resident or a national. So if you previously applied using interview waiver authorities and you're French, you need to do that in France. You cannot do that in Canada. However, if you're willing to go in for the visa interview, no matter where you are, and you can get an appointment in Toronto, enjoy the cold, balmy weather of Toronto. You're welcome to apply wherever you can get that appointment.
It's really interesting to hear. I mean, this is great feedback for us. It sounds like the J1 waiver process, the 212E waiver process, is on a lot of people's minds. Is that something that faces a lot of members of the NPA?
That's correct. Most of our postdocs are on J1s in the category of professors and research scholars, and they are subject to the 2-year home residency requirement. I think that the minority is not. Most of our postdocs are. And this is an ongoing problem because of the waiting times, right? And also because there seems to be little knowledge about this. So the NPA is trying to educate also our postdocs into these issues. Mm-hmm.
Wow, thank you. That's great feedback. I know I can say too that there is an extensive policy process going on right now here in Washington to evaluate the 2-year rule and the waiver process and how it's run in a way that will be, frankly, much better for members of NPA. So we can commit to keep you updated on that.
I also have several questions regarding H-1Bs, and as you mentioned before, this is not under your purview. So I'm not going to ask those questions because that is part of a different department. I have some other questions regarding J visas. There's a question about J2s and the possibility for working and getting an employment authorization document. And the question is related to spouses, right? And they were also asking about children who may be able to get some income. Could you please explain that?
Sure. So J2s are eligible to apply for employment authorization in the United States, and you would apply for that with the Department of Homeland Security. I will say we are in conversations about discussions about teleworking remotely as a J2 overseas. We are looking at that. We're getting more and more questions about, can my J2 spouse, can my F2 spouse work for a company in our home country while they're overseas? So that's a policy discussion we're currently having. As for students or minor derivative children, I think that is going to be up to the Department of Homeland Security and whether or not they meet the requirements to be able to apply for that employment authorization. I also just want to say that we can comment on H-1Bs that are being applied for internationally at embassies and consulates, just not really the process of applying domestically for a change of status, which some folks might be interested in doing.
So in that case, there are some questions regarding whether or not you have to leave the United States, when you are on an F1 or J1, and then you get an H-1B. Is this something that they need to do domestically, or they have to go back to their countries to do that?
My understanding is you can attempt to change status domestically. I believe that the Department of Homeland Security now actually has a way that you can request an expedite for doing this, so that you can pay extra to have your petition renewed or your request renewed within a shorter period of time. So you'll want to check out the Department of Homeland Security's website on that. But if you do not want to change your status domestically or unable to change it domestically, then you will need to go overseas and apply for that visa.
I have one more question. Our postdocs are international, which means that are very much international. They may be educated in one country, but they get their PhD degree in another country. They have one postdoctoral appointment on a third country, and then they come to the United States. So one of the questions here is about receiving the first J1 to come to the United States. And that stamp was not in the original country, but on a different country. The question is, do you need to return to the country where you got the stamp in order to renew, or to return to your country of origin to do that?
You can renew your visa anywhere. You can apply for renewing anywhere around the world. If you want to take advantage of the interview waiver authorities, you do need to apply in the country where you were previously resident or where you're a national of. So if you have a stamp in your passport because you've been working in France and you were considered a resident there, and you can show that, then you can apply then in France. But if you just went to France on vacation and got your visa there because it was a shorter wait time than in Belgium and you're Belgian, then you wouldn't be able to use those interview waiver authorities. But regardless, you can apply for a renewal in either location. It's just whether or not you need to come in for that interview, whether or not you may be eligible for those interview waiver authorities, depending on if you're a national or resident of the place where you previously were living before the United States.
Thank you. Tom, these are all the questions that are related to J1s and that are under the purview of the Department of State. I don't have any other questions to present.
Great. Well, before we sign off, I just wanted to ask Deputy Assistant Secretary Stufft or Rebecca, any other closing comments you had wanted to share?
I'll just say again, Tom, Dr. Cepeda, thank you everybody who is listening to us. Thank you for attending, and thank you for your feedback, which is so valuable to us. We are absolutely committed to improving any process we can. That includes the interview process itself, the administrative processing piece of it, but also the J waiver piece. And that's something that I had not made some connections on here. But I think that we should stay in touch so that your membership understands more about that as we move forward. And we will certainly do the same with the domestic renewal pilot later this year and into 2024. That has a huge amount of potential for your members and for just making visa appointments available for them anywhere in the world. So thank you. I just want to say that congratulations again, and thank you from us.
Well, and thank you very much, Deputy Assistant Secretary Stufft and Rebecca, for joining us. We certainly at the NPA and our members appreciate the work that you do, the hard work you do at the Department of State. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time today to join us on this special kickoff to our National Postdoc Appreciation Week 2023. Thanks also to our moderator, Dr. Cepeda, for joining us and handling all the questions coming in. We at the NPA understand there are some specific and additional issues that our international postdocs face that significantly can impact their satisfaction, whether at home or at work as postdocs. So these are very important issues. Please remember to complete and circulate that needs assessment survey that was put at the top of the chat. That's the information we need to really give you the programming and information you need for us to address your needs. Happy NPAW to all of you. Thanks for joining us. We'll sign off now.